It may be that the electrical vehicle revolution is inevitable, and it's just a question of how long it takes. But in the meantime, we seem to be living in the middle of a case study of what can go wrong when you try to do a massive change at an accelerated pace. Let's start where the revolution is at its height: China. As we know, China has dived into EVs big time, part of its determination to make the clean tech revolution a key part of its future economic growth. And at first glance, China's homegrown EV market is booming. Here's one version of the story to support that contention. Chinese EV manufacturers such as NIO, Zeekr, Xiaomi and XPeng have all broken their own sales records over recent months. According to the Business Insider website, XPeng delivered 24,000 vehicles last month. Xiaomi sold over 100,000 of its SU7 model so far this year. Zeekr delivered a record 55,000 vehicles over the last quarter, up 50% on last year. NIO delivered 61,800 vehicles over the last quarter. And of course, we know that they're all being successful because they're producing EVs cheaper than the West can replicate and threatening to flood the global market with them, spurring the United States and Europe to slap tariffs on them to desperately protect their own manufacturers. So that's one version. The other version, which is still based on the exact same reality, is that these companies are losing money hand over fist. NIO may have delivered a record number of cars in the last quarter, but it's also reported widening losses in its Q3 earnings report, where it disclosed a net loss of 5 billion yuan, which is about $700 million. Zeekr recorded a 1.14 billion yuan loss last year, that's $157 million. So why, if they're selling so many vehicles, are they bleeding cash? Principally because of the savage price war that's been ongoing. Turns out that even Chinese manufacturers can't really make EVs that cheaply. Now, it's not an unusual situation nor an unexpected one for an emerging marketplace where the stakes are so high and those who can capture the most market share win out. What you're seeing is companies seeking to survive an initial rationalization to be one of a handful left standing once the carnage has been completed. So from 300 Chinese EV startups, only 100 of them survived the first decade. Now there are fewer than 50 that still exist, only 40 of which are actually, currently selling cars. The chief executive of XPeng, He Xiaopeng, told the Straits Times that he believed there would be 7 of the companies still around by the end of the next decade. Those ones that are left will be the ones that become profitable because they get to dominate a viable slice of what is, after all, a pretty large pie. One Chinese company is not suffering these short-term problems, however. It has already broken through that barrier, and you probably know its name already. It's BYD, the company that's beaten Tesla into second place for EVs globally. BYD stands for Build Your Dreams, apparently, and they seem to have done just that. BYD built 3 million EVs in 2023 compared to Tesla's 1.8 million. It may even overtake Ford Motor Company for global vehicle sales in total for 2024. They're currently neck and neck at about 3.3 million for the first 3 quarters. BYD's net profit rose from the previous quarter to 11.6 billion yuan, about $1.6 billion. It's growing in China, while Tesla's sales there have been sliding. According to analysts, BYD has benefited from having a manufacturing approach of making almost every component in-house, which enables it to keep its costs down. And it can control the production, therefore, of its batteries, the all-important semiconductor chips. And for the rest, Well, it also has enough scale that it can push external suppliers to reduce their prices. So it recently demanded a 10% reduction, predicting that the price war is only going to intensify in 2025. It also has a strong hybrid lineup, so it's done well with the recent trends that have boosted what you might describe as halfway products. BYD is also becoming one of the drivers of innovation in the sector. For example, it will be launching a next generation battery for its vehicles, the so-called Blade battery, which promises increased range performance and longer lifespan. Clearly, when the market consolidates, BYD will have ridden the wave and become one of the key players. The question is, can Western companies deal with the speed of change? It's arguably been easier, although none of this is easy, for startups like Tesla and BYD to grow and become dominant than it has for existing major companies to transform. Signs of how that's going might be taken from the bankruptcy last week of Europe's big hope battery champion, Northvolt. Founded in Sweden in 2016, Northvolt promised to bring the all-important battery manufacturing back home from the Asian company stranglehold to serve European manufacturers. The Financial Times recalled that it was going to use the Nordic region's abundant and cheap green energy to challenge the likes of BYD to help Europe's auto industry transform and succeed. By 2022, it had $55 billion in customer orders. And it got drunk on its own hubris. It had plans for expansion across the world, leading to domination. While it was doing all that, it was singularly failing to sort out production in its home base, which produced, get this, less than 1% of the batteries that its capacity should have been able to produce. 1%. The remote location of the plant meant that they also struggled to attract good people to work there. Probably how you end up with 1%, did I mention that? Former and current employees told the FT that poor safety standards, unnecessary spending, and widespread mismanagement all came together to bring it down. Northvolt was left looking for emergency funding, but the Swedish government quickly ruled out state support. This stuff is hard, it turns out. It's easy to indulge survivor bias in how you look at this, looking at the BYDs and the Teslas and assuming that what they did must be easily reproducible. Northvolt now has new leadership. It hopes to raise extra financing and exit bankruptcy and have another go. But that hasn't yet stopped Asian producers from celebrating their good fortune. Meanwhile, governments that set forcing targets to push for transition to EVs are discovering that such policies create those pesky unintended consequences. So in the UK, what the right-wing media are calling Labour's net zero plans, but what was actually a policy brought in by the previous Conservative government, have provoked a major pushback in the wake of Vauxhall announcing the closure of a plant in Luton with the loss of over 1,000 jobs. And the company said that this was, in part at least, due to the EV target rules. This was the government of Rishi Sunak, who announced last year that car manufacturers would be required to have 80% of new cars, 70% of new vans to be zero emissions by 2030, increasing to 100% by 2035. And the companies would be fined for failing to reach that threshold. Now, this always seemed to be an odd mechanism, because ultimately the companies are not really in control of customer demand. I mean, yes, if incentivized, they can bring their best marketing to bear, and they can cut prices and all the rest of it. But when they've done all of that, ultimately, if you're trying to push faster than the customer wants to go, then where does that leave you? Well, it's left car makers staring at a potential £2 billion in fines, even though they've been spending twice that on discounts, trying to make the cars more attractive to buyers. Last week, the government met with company executives to puzzle it out, and then subsequently announced that there was going to be a consultation on the zero emissions mandate to give the car industry clarity. Seasoned Westminster watchers will recognise the slow grinding gears of an imminent U-turn. Not all companies want the mandate abandoned. Challenger companies such as Octopus Electric Vehicles see it as caving into the weaknesses of the laggard companies. But if those laggard companies are the ones currently employing thousands of workers, well, their problems are going to be taken seriously by the government. One of their other problems is that when you bring in new technology at a rapid pace, the teething problems with that technology can turn into a big-scale headache. Jaguar has announced that it's buying back one of its EV models from all of its US owners due to the risk of fires. Owners had previously been given the not wholly reassuring advice to only charge the batteries up to 80% and to park them outside, just in case it might burst into flames. Sort of like buying a new family dog and being told, yeah, it's probably best to leave the muzzle on, whenever it's in a room, particularly with children. Still, at least it diverted attention from its recent rebranding exercise, which caused more than a few commentators to burst into flames on viewing it, by all accounts. The company's rebrand is meant to position it as a electric-only competitor with the likes of Porsche and Bentley. It's going to be launching its new line of cars next week. So, will it become then known as a marketing genius that defied the naysayers, mopped up the electric car buyers who now turn up their nose at anything associated with Elon Musk? Or will it be another case study filed under the derisive label of Go Woke, Go Broke? Only time will tell. In the meantime, expect this to continue to be an extremely messy market, not least when Donald Trump arrives in the White House. By all accounts, the transition is going to continue, regardless of presidential preferences. The details will certainly change in the light of those preferences for sure, but you cannot make such a big shift without it being messy. Without some companies failing the test, new challenges emerging, some of them failing, false starts, setbacks, embarrassments. Well, it'll give us something all to talk about, if nothing else.